Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we have a good show for you guys today. There's a lot going on. If you could, please do hit the like button and subscribe. Helps us out. We're also on social media. We're on Twitter and BlueSky, so you can find us there. And also check out our website, Tochnyi.info. It's a very informative website. There's a lot of articles that are published or essays, and there's also a lot of interactive maps and other research that's done by a large number of people who are interested in collecting information and writing articles about what's going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So check out Tochnyi.info if you're so inclined. So today, first I'll present the news. That'll be followed by a report from Mr. German Aid to Ukraine. That'll be followed by Stanimir's report on the Russian economy. Then we'll talk about a few other things, and then we'll get to Q&A. So chat if you guys have any questions during the broadcast on any of the topics. Just ask your question in chat, and we'll do our best to get to it towards the end. So I will now present the news. These are the main headlines as of August 9th, 2026. First up, we have operations. Ukrainian drones struck the Slavnefteyanos oil refinery in Yaroslavl, Russia on the morning of August 6th. Open source analysts identified the location of the fire by examining photos and videos posted online. The refinery is among Russia's 5 largest by processing capacity. Eyewitness footage from Yaroslavl showed heavy black smoke rising above the complex after explosions were heard, with several fires visible on the refinery grounds. The governor of the region said that around 3 a.m. Ukrainian drones were attacking the area. Authorities also temporarily closed traffic on the highway running from Yaroslavl toward Moscow as a public safety measure. Slavnefteyanos is the largest refinery in Russia's central federal district and can process as much as 15 million metric tons of crude oil each year. The refinery is located more than 700 kilometers or about 435 miles from Ukraine's internationally recognized border. The refinery produces a broad range of petroleum products, including gasoline for vehicles, aviation fuel, and lubricants. Its output is supplied to major industrial enterprises throughout Russia's central and northwestern regions. The refinery also provides products to airports, the Northern Railway Administration, and facilities connected to Russia's military-industrial sector. The refinery has been targeted by Ukrainian drones several times before. One of the most recent incidents occurred on July 16th when an FP-1 drone hit the refinery's tank storage area. Ukrainian forces struck the Saratov oil refinery and the nearby Engels 2 strategic aviation air base in Russia's Saratov region on August 2nd, setting off a major fire at the refinery. Videos posted online and subsequent open-source analysis indicated that both facilities were targeted. Residents in Saratov and surrounding areas reported explosions during the night and saw a large fire burning in the area. The regional governor confirmed that the region had come under attack and said that initial information indicated that people had been harmed. Open-source analysis indicated that the drone struck several important parts of the Saratov refinery, including the ELOU ABT-6 crude oil distillation unit. That unit has the capacity to process around 6 million tons of oil each year. The distillation unit performs 2 important early stages of refining. It removes salts from incoming crude oil and carries out the first atmospheric distillation process. Crude supplied from pumping stations enters the unit before being separated into several basic fractions. Those fractions include naphtha, which can later be used to produce gasoline, along with kerosene, diesel, and fuel oil. These materials then move through additional stages of refining to become finished petroleum products. Because the unit sits near the beginning of that process, taking it out of operation can bring much of the refinery's later processing activity to a halt. The Saratov oil refinery is owned by Rosneft and is located around 600 kilometers or roughly 370 miles from the front line. It is among the oldest oil refineries still operating in Russia. In 2024, the facility processed approximately 5.8 million metric tons of crude oil. That represented about 2.2% of Russia's total refining capacity for that year. The Engels 2 strategic aviation air base was also targeted during the operation. The base is located around 17 kilometers from the Saratov refinery. Engels 2 is able to accommodate Russia's main types of strategic bombers, including the Tu-160, Tu-95MS, and Tu-22M3. These aircraft are capable of carrying long-range weapons and have played a role in Russian strikes against Ukraine. After Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb in June 2025, Russia moved a significant portion of its strategic aviation fleet further east. As a result, Engels 2 has increasingly been used as a temporary staging location rather than as the permanent home for much of the fleet. At Engels 2, Tu-160 and Tu-95 MS bombers are prepared and armed with Kh-101 cruise missiles before departing on missions against Ukraine. Between August 1st and August 8th, Ukrainian unmanned systems units struck another 12 vessels linked to Russia's remaining Shadow Fleet in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. The operations were carried out by drone operators from the 414th Magyars Burz Brigade, the 20th K2 Brigade, and the 413th Raid Regiment. Russian forces attempted to counter the attacks using a Pantsir air defense system, but Ukrainian units continued their missions. Since Operation Molochka began on July 6th, Ukrainian unmanned systems forces say they have successfully engaged 218 vessels. Of those, 134 were targeted in the Sea of Azov and another 84 in the Black Sea. Up next, we have economy and aid. Sweden's Supreme Court has ruled that the confiscated bulk carrier Kaffa will be transferred to Ukraine. The vessel had been linked to Russia's Shadow Fleet and was accused of involvement in transporting Ukrainian grain taken from occupied territory. Swedish authorities seized the ship in April after investigating suspected sanctions violations. The vessel also had attracted scrutiny because it was operating under what authorities determined was a fraudulent Ghanaian flag. The Kaffa was detained on March 6 in the Baltic Sea near the Swedish city of Trelleborg. At the time, it was traveling from Casablanca towards St. Petersburg. The process that led to the vessel's confiscation began after Sweden received a legal assistance request from an unnamed country investigating the unlawful export of Ukrainian grain. In July 2025, the Kaffa entered the Russian-occupied port of Sevastopol and loaded Ukrainian grain that had been taken from occupied territory. Ukraine later placed the ship on its sanctions list because of its involvement in those shipments. Following the Swedish court's ruling, control of the confiscated vessel is now set to be transferred to Ukraine. The European Union has imposed sanctions on 5 senior executives from Russian defense companies involved in producing missiles and other military technology. The measures target managers whose factories manufacture components for the Iskander-M ballistic missile and the RS-28 Sarmat intercontinental missile, along with executives overseeing companies involved in military communications, drone software, and space-based defense technology. The EU Foreign Policy Chief announced the measures on August 7th as European governments continued efforts to increase economic pressure on Russia over its war against Ukraine and the growing use of ballistic missiles against Ukrainian cities. 2 of the sanctioned executives lead major missile-related manufacturing plants. Ramil Bagdutinov is executive of the Serpukhov Metallist plant, which produces precision electromechanical components used in the Iskander-M ballistic missile. Alexander Dukarev heads the Krasnoyarsk machine building plant, which manufactures ballistic missile systems, including the RS-28 Sarmat. The other 3 individuals manage Russian companies involved in military communications equipment, software used in unmanned aircraft, and military technology designed for use in space. All 5 individuals are now subject to EU asset freezes. European individuals and companies are prohibited from making money or other economic resources available to them, and the 5 executives are barred from traveling within the European Union. The EU Council said that the sanctions followed the June 18th and 19th European Council decision, calling for additional measures to increase pressure on Russia. Despite previous restrictions, foreign components continue to reach Russian weapon production lines. An Iskander missile manufactured in 2025 was found to contain foreign parts that had been produced during 2025. Indicating that recently manufactured components were still entering Russia after years of sanctions. The European Union will provide Ukraine with 1.4 billion euros generated from revenues tied to frozen Russian assets. The money will be directed towards strengthening Ukraine's defense capabilities and improving the country's resilience. The Ukrainian Prime Minister said that the funds would help reinforce the state as it continues responding to Russian attacks, and he said Russia should bear financial consequences for each new attack carried out against Ukraine. The Prime Minister requested that Europe continue expanding its use of frozen Russian assets to support both Ukraine's defense requirements and the country's reconstruction. Up next, we have international relations. President Zelensky appointed National Security and Defense Council Secretary Rustem Umerov to lead Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service on August 3rd under a decree published by the presidential office. In a separate decree, Zelensky named the former Interior Minister as the new Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, replacing Umerov in that position. Zelensky said Umerov will continue overseeing the drone deal initiative while also remaining involved in diplomatic efforts aimed at ending Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. Umerov leads the Ukrainian delegation in trilateral negotiations involving Ukraine, Russia, and the United States. Those talks have been stalled since February. He also has been working to secure defense agreements with partners in the Middle East. Zelensky said Umerov is in a stronger position to handle several responsibilities at the same time, including diplomacy, defense matters, negotiations with the U.S., and discussions with other international partners. The appointments are part of a major government reshuffle launched by Zelensky in July. Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service had been without a permanent chief since January. Major General Ola Lukhovsky had served as the agency's acting head since February, but he was removed from that position on August 3rd. Russia has appointed Colonel General Denis Lyamin to lead the Russian Armed Forces' newly created Unmanned Systems Forces. Lyamin previously served as the chief of staff of the Center Group of Forces. The Russian president announced the appointment during a meeting with senior defense ministry officials. He said Russia had decided to establish unmanned systems as a separate branch of the armed forces and described Lyamin as one of the country's most qualified specialists in the field. Russia first announced plans to create the Unmanned Systems Forces in November of 2024. The defense minister later said in December of that year that the new branch was expected to be established during the third quarter of 2025. From October of 2023 until August of 2026, he served as the chief of staff of the Center Group, which was involved in fighting around the Liman and Pokrovsk areas of Ukraine. Before that, Lyamin commanded Russia's 58th Combined Arms Army from July to October of 2023. That formation was operating along the southern part of the front during his period in command. The development of a dedicated Russian unmanned systems branch reflects the growing importance of drones in the war. And last item this week, North Korea has begun deploying a dedicated missile unit to Russia's Voronezh region to support ballistic missile attacks against Ukraine. Ukrainian military intelligence says the North Korean formation consists of roughly 90 personnel and is expected to receive 6 missile launchers along with as many as 120 ballistic missiles. The unit is expected to operate within Russia's 112th Missile Brigade. North Korea has also reportedly delivered another shipment of 40 KN-23 and KN-24 ballistic missiles to Russia together with military personnel. The final structure of the North Korean unit and the overall number of missiles assigned to it are expected to be determined during senior-level talks scheduled for September. Russia has used North Korean ballistic missiles against Ukraine since late 2023, but the deployment of a North Korean unit specifically tasked with operating the weapons represents a deeper level of direct military cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang. On July 30th, Russia used a North Korean-made KN-23 ballistic missile against the settlement of Radushne in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region. 6 people lost their lives in the attack, including 3 children, while another 9 people were wounded. Investigators later found a second impact crater in a field approximately 3.5 kilometers from the location of the first strike. The second crater was also attributed to a North Korean missile. Before the July 30th attack, Russian forces had most recently used these missiles in August of 2025. Ukrainian military intelligence estimates that North Korea has supplied Russia with around 150 ballistic missiles between 2023 and 2025. The KN-23, also known as the Hwasong-11GA, is a North Korean solid-fuel short-range ballistic missile. Open-source assessments indicate that its standard configuration can carry a warhead weighing about 500 kilograms over a distance of up to approximately 450 kilometers. Its range can increase if the missile carries a lighter payload. Ukrainian military engineers and researchers examined debris recovered from North Korean missiles to determine how closely the weapons were related to Russian ballistic missile designs. Their laboratory analysis concluded that the KN-23 is not simply a direct copy of an existing Soviet or Russian missile, and it was not manufactured under a production license for Russia's 9M723 Iskander missile. Instead, the Ukrainian examination determined that the North Korean missile appears to have been developed from a modified version of one of the earlier missile concepts associated with the development of the Iskander system. And that's it for the main headlines this week. We will now move to the next segment.
Yeah, and the next segment, that would be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present the most important recent news from Germany regarding Ukraine. We are starting with plenty of donations of pickups. First, on Tuesday, I reported that Germany's Federal Agency for Technical Relief, THW, has donated 8 Mitsubishi L200 pickup trucks to communities, municipal utilities, district administrations, and rescue teams in the Zaporizhia Oblast. On the same day, I reported that they also delivered another 12 Mitsubishi L200 pickup trucks to the Luhansk Oblast, where they'll now be used to deliver medicines and humanitarian aid to internally displaced Ukrainians. And, you can already guess it, the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast has also received 8 modern Mitsubishi pickup trucks from Germany's Federal Agency for Technical Relief. They are now being used by communities in 3 regional districts to respond more quickly to emergencies. Last news from Tuesday, Germany has donated 10 sets of hydraulic rescue equipment via the German Society for International Cooperation, GITS, to Ukraine's State Emergency Service. The equipment will help to deal with the aftermath of Russian attacks. And last news item, the German government is co-financing major repairs of 4 apartment buildings, as well as the construction of an entirely new residential building in the Kyiv region through the German state-owned development bank KfW. The work is carried out by IOM Ukraine. And that's it for my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Germinated to Ukraine. Briefly, I did want to discuss with you a certain incident that occurred this week in Germany involving a Ukrainian plane. If you could maybe just explain to everyone like the facts of the situation, like as we understand it.
Yeah, so a lot of the things are not official yet. They have to be confirmed, but many of the news outlets already broke the news. Basically, what happened was that a drone, an FPV drone carrying a big Semtex package, was found meters away from an Ukrainian transport plane, which is currently located in at the airport in Germany, and didn't explode because the detonator failed. Thanks God. And another plane, this one was a German, but it wasn't the target, collided with a second object. They didn't manage to find if it was a drone or it was something else. They haven't found anything, but they discovered damage to the second aircraft, which reported that it hit something close to where the first FPV drone was found. And yeah, that's it. I think we can all assume who it was and what was the goal with an FPV drone near Ukrainian plane located in Germany, which is regularly used to transport military aid, and who did it. So yeah, that's the fact as we know it.
Thanks for the explanation. So yeah, I think it's just something the German security services will have to take very seriously, and hopefully they can,
we will write a strong worded letter, I assume.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention something on this, that there is a chance that this attack was meant to fail, in the sense that the likelihood that the trigger mechanism or the fuse fails, as in the report, the fuse broke off. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I'm guessing that we won't get the details technically on that, but to me it's just striking that for some reason an FPV drone flown most likely by someone who knows very well what they're doing, constructed by someone who probably has technical knowledge on how this should be done for it to actually detonate, doesn't detonate when it's crashing into an aircraft or whatever actually happened. But it falls into the scheme of what the Russians have been doing a lot, which is trying to incite fear without actually doing significant harm on European soil, even if there has been drones striking or detonating in NATO countries in Europe, like in Romania, etc. It hasn't led to massive casualties, for instance. But in this case, it could have, if it actually detonated. And obviously, this is a military target because the Leipzig airport is being used by NATO forces to transport military goods. So I just wanted to, kind of ponder on the fact that this might was rigged not to detonate, but we will not obviously know that for sure. But there is a possibility, at least.
Yeah, I think it's a valid theory. I think everything you stated is like accurate in terms of my understanding that it seems a little bit strange for someone with the level of technical knowledge to assemble and deploy a drone to that level, like would mess up on a fuse, which is like pretty simple technology by the year 2026, compared to all the other stuff that had to come into place to get the drone there. I guess like the one other like alternative explanation might be that the Russians have been known to use social media to recruit, schmucks basically. And maybe there's something that happened there where they were using, not the sharpest tools in the shed to pull this off. But I think both explanations are equally valid. I'd probably lean towards yours, actually, but it's hard to say with any certainty either way.
Yeah, but just from reading the reports afterwards, it's just striking to me that they're like, but they don't know who controlled the drone, and there was no interception of the signal, etc. And it just shows how unprepared we are in Europe to these kind of drone attacks. By the year 2026, we don't have detection systems for the RF signals that these drones use. We don't. And if we had, we would have been able to triangulate possibly where it was coming from. But apparently, there was nothing there. Another thing we don't have is surveillance systems that can track these by radar, because they are obviously very small, and you need specific radars to be able to track them. And almost no airport in Europe has that. So, to a sense, it's kind of good that we we get tested, because this is scary. Like the fact that FPV drones haven't caused some sort of mass casualty event in the West yet is actually surprising, because it's actually fairly simple to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the implications of these new technologies are pretty significant, especially when it comes to aircraft, where something like this could really cause some scary stuff. I guess, Stanimir, I was going to bring this up later on the panel news segment, but this is kind of along the same vein, I think, which is like the recent incident in Bulgaria. So maybe we should just talk about that real quick. Did you want to explain what happened?
Yes, Ukrainian drone, probably as the Bulgarian government's head of the military is saying, is a decoy drone, wandered into Bulgarian territory 500 meters from the border with Romania and exploded on Saturday. The Prime Minister reacted with entire press conference and an emergency. I think the rest of the government reacted more in the way that this should have been handled. The Foreign Ministry said that there's no one is thinking that Ukraine was actually aiming to attack Bulgaria. It's just a drone that got carried away. The head of the military, the admiral, said that it was a drone that was a decoy that landed in Bulgaria and exploded with a small warhead as a decoy drone. And beyond the overreaction of the Prime Minister, I think everyone took it normally. We have a problem with detecting drones on our border. That's something that should be worked into, but we also have problems with detecting planes as a whole. The Bulgarian radar grid is fairly obsolete. It's built with analog radars when it comes to the military radar grid. It hasn't been updated for decades. It's something that's always on the docket when it comes to reforms in the army and replacements. And sometimes we actually rely on planes in the air to survey the sky. For example, for a while, Greece was sending an airborne radar to patrol the Bulgarian Black Sea coast to provide sighting for anything incoming into Bulgaria. So in that regard, Bulgaria is behind. But in terms of what the drone was, it was just a wayward drone that landed in a place where no one was. And it was roughly 50-50 chance if it was going to land in Romania and Bulgaria, given how close it was to the border.
Yeah, so I think both these stories kind of illustrate just the fact that, I don't think, I think Germany has the resources. I think Bulgaria probably shouldn't be expected to create some kind of, futuristic drone wall. But in terms of, I guess, like broader EU defense and NATO defense, it seems like investing in this would be pretty important. And it seems like there could be some integration, some benefits to integrating this. So probably the EU and NATO would be a good mechanism to do that. But, I'm just talking out loud. There's certainly a lot of experimental things that the Ukrainians have been doing at relatively low cost in terms of drone detection that could be probably deployed and at least tested in countries like Bulgaria. But I guess we'll have to see how the situation develops. I'd say right now the response is pretty anemic in terms of deploying actual technologies today that can detect drones. But anything else, Stanimir?
Yeah, I think that Bulgaria just doesn't have the resources to implement something like that because, for example, when we were buying new fighter planes, we decided to buy 8 planes because we couldn't afford more. And that would tell you, given availability rates, that we at any given time, we have 1 or 2 planes ready to go up. So yeah, we are resource strapped in that regard.
Yeah, so hopefully there's, I'd say there definitely needs to be a lot more technology development and research in this whole topic. But, I think ground-based systems that can detect drones are going to be really significant, especially for countries like Bulgaria, where, you're relying on having planes in the air. And that's a pretty expensive proposition, right? Okay, so yeah, I think up next, Stanimir, is going to be your report on the Russian economy. Quickly, we did want to talk, though, about a recent incident that occurred, which is a gentleman named Boris Nadezhdin. He fled Russia. He was called in Western media an anti-war politician. I'll let Stanimir qualify that if he prefers. But he successfully fled Russia to France, despite authorities placing an exit ban on him a few weeks prior to that. So, Stanimir, do you want to tell us a little bit about the background and the circumstances that led to this?
Yes, he was going to take part in the Duma elections with his party. He became sort of the spoiler candidate for the presidential election initially. After that, however, they withdrew support from him, and he couldn't get enough signatures verified by the Russian Election Committee. He is supposedly had some connections to the Russian presidential administration. That's why he was used as sort of a spoiler candidate. He was seen as part of the controlled opposition to an extent, the tame opposition. He was also, he managed to gain popularity during the presidential election as opposition party that was against the war. And I think given this, and when he tried to add his party to the Duma election, I think they decided he was going rogue too much. He was becoming too much of an actual threat. And what they first did is they declared him a foreign agent, which immediately makes him ineligible to run in Russian presidential elections, in Russian Duma elections, in Russian regional elections. So I think that's when he thought that even though he had some connections, the talk is that he had connections to Kirienko from the presidential administration in Russia. He thought that they no longer protected him within Russia, and someone who's already dead said that if you're afraid of Putin, you shouldn't stay in Russia. And so he fled. And there's still ways to flee in Russia. For those who have been mobilized in the army or have joined the army with contracts, there's ED-less. There are ways to evacuate Russia without actually being stopped. But again, this is a sign that they don't want even the tamest of oppositions to be present in Russia. And also, he was often on Prvy Canal being the voice of, let's say, the anti-war stance, where people would say how the war is going well, and he would say that, let's say, half the world hates us and we've been closed off from all the banking networks in the world. He was that sort of a candidate. So I would point out that in lieu of him, they tried to revive the Yabloko party as a form of, again, an opposition they want to control and prevent from getting enough votes, but as an outlet to see that the opposition stance in Russia isn't getting much support, even though if you look at the stances in surveys and polls on whether people are worried or anxious about the war, people want the war to end, basically. I think the support for the war has dropped below 50% already, and strong support is in 8-10% in terms of the war is going well and the war should continue. So the other thing, however, is that after they announced that Yabloko could be the opposition party on these elections for the Duma as a way to have a spoiler candidate, I think they got scared afterwards because other small parties that are aligned with the Kremlin started to file court cases against Yabloko, and they're trying to get the party to be declared an extremist organization, and then it's going to be off the ballot. For those who don't know, Yabloko used to be the opposition party in Russia. It's the party that spawned Navalny more than a decade and a half ago. It's been forced into submission by the Kremlin. It's still sort of intellectual parties. They're trying to be an opposition from within Russia without actually saying anything controversial, but they're still sort of an opposition party. They've lost a lot of leadership and members, and a lot of those have been declared foreign agents, so they can't stand in the elections. But they got a chance now to run in sort of a managed election, and they were allowed to run in parts of Russia where they would be expected to not succeed. But given how much people are against the war, I think the Kremlin got scared that they would actually manage to get a lot more people interested in the party, and they're now trying to shut that down completely and declare the party an extremist organization, which basically ends all political careers for everyone in that group. And that's been used in the past to shut down movements like the Red Swans, which were trying to protest against the war in innovative ways. And this is probably how this is going to end over the next few weeks. I don't think they'll be allowed in the Duma election at all at this point.
And the Yabloko party obviously is basically the sole remainder of the real opposition parties in Russia, but the only way they've managed to survive is basically by staying very quiet and not speaking the truth about what's happening, right? They're not being very explicit about their opposition. They're because of, obviously, or they would have been kicked out long ago, right?
Yes, but they're sort of one of the last remainders of the older opposition parties. Newer opposition figures have emerged, like Tuntsova is one example that would have probably been a good challenger for Putin had they had fair elections and she had been allowed to run. That's how we got Boris Nadezhdin, with her support going towards him, as when he said that he's also going to be an anti-war candidate. But yeah, Yabloko is one of the remainders of the old form of opposition, but they've been humbled to the point that they had to limit their rhetoric completely. And now I think even that is no longer being seen as enough as an obedience to the Kremlin in terms of getting into the elections. It was very weird for people that they even got allowed into the elections, because in the previous elections they hadn't been allowed. And now it seems that their attempt to make, they call it a managed election, basically put on a spectacle that there is an opposition, that there is alternatives, but they get nothing. I think that scared them, that people would start questioning the vote figures, and you would lose a lot of support from the public as a whole, because people aren't being heard. And if you want to see how, for example, current Duma parties are doing, I think the approval rating of United Russia, which is supposed to win this election, is below 40%, even in official polling.
Do you think that the mobilization also might be connected to the fact that, or the potential mobilization connected to the fact that these kind of crackdowns are happening? Because obviously mobilization would be very unpopular, and these parties that people know they're against the war, even if they're not explicitly saying it loud out very often. They were saying something in the start of 2022, and also they did oppose the annexation of Crimea, but people know still that these people are against the war. I guess at least informed people. Do you think that the mobilization potentially could be the reason for why they're doing this?
Well, it's not just the fear of the mobilization, it's the fear of everything that's coming after the election. So things that have been postponed since after the election is blocking of VPN traffic. A possible mobilization, yes, is something that people fear, but we already have what's called busing in Russian, of people in a few regions where they're being forcefully picked off the street and forced into signing contracts with the army. I think this is in my report this week, but for example, in central Russia, only 31% of the mobile internet traffic this year was without disruptions from the government. We are seeing what's happening with Wildberries, which was something like 20-30% of Russian non-groceries retail and 5% of the GDP. We're also seeing the lines at fuel stations. We're seeing that even towns like Moscow and St. Petersburg are not without problems when it comes to drone attacks, and even the sirens don't announce those. So yeah, I've said that on Twitter, that Russian life in the last 6 months got so miserable it hasn't been this bad in the last 2 decades. So to that degree, people want out of this war. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not an expert, but if you look at Russian social media, I think it's a combination of factors that Stanimir has been doing his best to kind of articulate into like economics, which is like you have Russians complaining about like municipal services being either like completely unavailable or like really bad. You have people who rely on the internet for business or just like want to use the internet for stuff, having all these disruptions. And you have like all these other economic problems, and then on top of that, you have mobilization. I mean, it's all clearly converging on one issue, which is the continuous invasion of Ukraine. It's all kind of hollowing out the country, and yeah, I don't know. Like it's definitely palpable that the Russian life, as Stanimir put it, has like noticeably declined. I would say as a direct result of the invasion.
Yeah, and I have to point out that, for example, things that were better in Russia than in Europe, air travel, it's gotten worse. For example, 18% less people traveled by plane from Moscow to St. Petersburg, which used to be a cheap destination, because right now you don't know when the airport is going to be shut down because of drone attacks, which it seems obvious to Russians that the Russian government can't stop. And they're just being forced to talk in euphemisms. There are censorship laws that are hard to understand. Life has become, even for teenagers who try to find music online, has become difficult because you can't find songs because they're censored.
Yeah, so we'll obviously keep reporting on the various developments. But Stanimir, you have your weekly report for us, so over to you.
Yes, and I'll start with something that I saw people on Twitter saying that seems to have been over, but I have to point out that it's not even close to over. We have the Russian fuel crisis. So for this week, it started with Russian Deputy Prime Minister Novak confirming that the issues will remain in regions dominated by independent gas stations. And the gas stations, the independent ones themselves, actually asked for direct support from the Russian government because they can't get fuel and they can't get even contracts they've already signed can't be fulfilled. They also prolonged the ban on the sale of fuel, not the ban, but the allowance to sell fuel as bad as Euro 2 standards. So it's going to continue until July 1st, 2027. So this means that they don't expect the fuel crisis to be over this year at all. At least they'll have to lower fuel quality to the point that they produce enough fuel to have enough fuel for everyone. And we know that in the first half of this year, so even before things got really bad, the number of closures of gas stations accelerated by 70%, and 1.89% of gas stations in Russia have closed down. So that's 322. Out of these, 105 were from large independent chains. From medium-sized independent chains, there were 69. And from small chains and singular gas stations, there were 82. Also, the companies that operate their own refineries had gas stations closed. Those were 67. So it's impacting everyone, and it's only getting worse compared to last year when a similar number closed down in the second half of the year when they had the shortage. And on the refining side, so for July, they announced that actually refining had improved by 4%. But if you know what you're talking about, the refining capacity was down by over 30% for July, going into July. So they increasing it by 4% doesn't mean that it improved significantly. When it comes to fuel subsidies, we got the data for June. They paid 113 billion rubles versus 210.6 billion rubles in May. The reason for this is the higher price of gasoline that was being sold by Russian fuel companies, basically by the companies with refineries. And the final big thing in terms of country-to-country level agreements is that Kyrgyzstan also said that it's going to receive the 100,000 tons of fuel it contracted from Russia at the end of August. So they already signed an agreement, but the fuel shipment for August is going to come only at the end of August, which means that a new wave of Ukrainian strikes on refineries can prevent that. And we've already seen that happening this week with things getting worse. Now, when it comes to local news, we have a lot of stories to show that things are not improving. So in Yakutia, finding gasoline continues to be difficult. There are queues at the remaining open gas stations, and some of the independent gas stations from the smaller companies in the region have switched to selling fuel only by fuel cards. So basically, if you're from the public, you can't buy fuel directly. Stavropol has serious issues, even though the Russian government sent fuel to neighboring Krasnodar. In Stavropol, there are entire swaths of roads and parts of the region where there is no significant fuel. It also has to be said that in Krasnodar, fuel again ran out on August 6th, which coincided with strikes on refineries. So from August 6th onwards, they had serious issues in terms of queues and shortages in Krasnodar Krai itself. In Stavropol, there are problems with fuel being sold for as much as 200 rubles per liter, and there's still queues at those gas stations because there's just a shortage. In Kaliningrad, which removed limits on the sale of fuels because it's sort of a window to the world, it's the most Western Russian region. It again has issues with fuel not being available everywhere. So there are gas stations without gasoline, even though they're not having any limits, they can't find gasoline to sell. So it doesn't matter that they don't have limits. In Tambov, following the attack on the local refinery, gasoline is available at only 30 to 45% of gas stations. In Zabalkaysky Krai, the gas station Neft Market is refusing to sign contracts with company to supply them with fuel because it has no ability to buy more. In rural Krasnoyarsk, district administrations can't find fuel suppliers for their tenders. So basically, if you are operating vehicles from the government in Krasnoyarsk Krai, you're basically out of luck when it comes to finding fuel unless the government orders that gas stations supply you with priority. Moscow region lifted limits on the sale of gasoline. As a result of that, even at big chains, there's no A95 gasoline. And this is from this week, from, I think, I'm drawing a blank on the town, but it's one of the bigger towns in Moscow region, which means that the problem is very much widespread. In Rudo, Khakassia, fuel is being used up as soon as it's delivered, and small towns are basically out of fuel when it comes to supplies. In Kuzbas, they consider it a success that 21% of gas stations have fuel. But if you look at independent gas stations, only 9% have any fuel for sale. So by August 7, if we look at Kaluga region, it again had serious issues and started using the fuel portal again, which means people started to again hunt for gas stations, and officials had to announce which gas stations had fuel in the region because they ran out. On the same day, a similar thing happened in Voronezh, Lipetsk, Arkhangelsk region, Smolensk region, Penza. Rostov is back to having multi-kilometer queues at gas stations. Multi-hour queues are also seen in Ryazan, and prices there are up to 130 rubles per liter if you wanted an independent gas station. Bashkiria has issues in, I think, 3 of its districts, but also more importantly, on the main highways, it has shortage of gasoline. You can't find almost anywhere on the main highway from Orenburg to Ufa. you can find fuel. In Dagestan, they continue to have shortages. So fuel is offered there at well over 100 rubles per liter at independent gas stations. In Vladimir region, the situation got a lot worse over the last week with shortages and the local government failing to find sellers for their tenders. So things like municipal vehicles, emergency vehicles, they have trouble finding fuel. And Yaroslavl region also has huge queues once its refinery got hit. So basically, over most of Russia, even close to Moscow, the fuel shortages have returned. The second wave of Ukrainian attacks proves to be significant in terms of the ability to knock out Russian fuel production. And also, we already know that over the past few months, they dug into their supplies and their ability to order fuel from abroad. I think when it comes to Belarus, they can probably ship another 20,000 tons of fuel per month, but they're operating currently at their peak, and they're supplying only about 2 or 3% of what Russia needs even then. And the last thing we heard was, I think, South Korean offer for the Russian government managed through intermediaries to buy from South Korea something like 30,000 tons of gasoline. It's again just 30% or maybe closer to 20% of daily consumption in the summer, but it's still something that they can throw at the market. And we know from surveys that something like 20 to 30% of Russians have actually reduced the number of trips they do by their own car, mostly because of the prices, but also because of the shortage and the amount of time they have to spend to find fuel. So even though I wasn't covering this on Twitter, people who are actually following the gasoline shortage news and who are doing other maps like Alexander, they managed to show that, no, the situation is still bad and it's here to stay. And it's also getting worse with the second wave of strikes that's making things worse for Russian refineries. If they continue the strikes and also hit places like Omsk again, it's going to be even worse than it was in July. So when we're going to continue with Wildberries, which also got hit this week. The facilities that were hit were in Vladimir, Krasny Bor, which is in Leningrad region, Yekaterinburg, which was hit only partially, had a fire, but didn't collapse the entire warehouse, and Tula, which was actually destroyed in Alexin. So apart from the last hit that didn't manage to fully destroy the warehouse, just set a fire in several compartments, all the others were almost completely destroyed by the attacks from Ukrainian drones. And the company also managed to piss off sellers again this week, buying a new office building from the bank Otkritie from VTB. Otkritie was merged with VTB, and they no longer needed a head office. So that was offered to their partner Wildberries for between 7.7 and 13.5 billion rubles. That's over $10 million or close to 10 million these days. The dollar has strengthened. And Russian sellers actually didn't expect that to happen. They preferred that the company actually save more money to cover their losses, but I don't think that's going to be happening this week. The company also banned the use of smartphones at its facilities, claiming this was done to protect air defense installations. But if you've seen videos from, for example, the strike on Yekaterinburg, there's no air defense near to them that you're going to defend significantly with removing people's smartphones from them. So basically, they're trying to hide from the rest of the world that their facilities are being hit and their facilities are burning. Kazakhstan also denied that the company had approached the government directly for new warehouse spaces. We know from last week that they were looking for warehouse spaces in Kazakhstan, but Kazakhstan has only a limited amount of warehouse space. I think for the entire country, the Class A warehouse space is 130,000 square meters, which is half of what Wildberries is currently building, and it's spread all over the country, so they can't find a big warehouse for their needs. That was one of their plans to circumvent strikes on their facilities with their goods in Russia. Also, when it comes to Wildberries, they started offering new insurance for goods. This is priced at 1.96% to 5.6%. I think this is close to 40% higher than the previous insurance offer. And this could cover drone attacks if you buy it. But again, if you buy it, you're probably eating into your own margins because it's much more expensive than it was before. It's still only going to cover a limited amount. The insurance sum is 50,000 rubles per good. And when it comes to the insurance event, you're going to get coverage for only 100,000 rubles per the insurance event, meaning that if you lose 2 million rubles in goods burned down, you're going to get just 100,000 rubles from the insurance. So it's not a good coverage, but it's also an increase in the amount you pay every month for your goods stored in their facilities. The other thing they wanted to do on Friday, we learned that they're trying to find companies that can offer them 200 or more square meters of warehouse space. But this has to apply to their standards, and they're going to try to have a distributed system of warehousing. But these have to have surveillance, certain level of security. They also want specific guarantees that it has safety measures. So it's a lot of work to rent out your warehouse for a company that is currently being targeted by someone very concentrated on their destruction in terms of warehouse space. And we know that right now, pickup points working with Wildberries are reporting that their turnover has fallen by 50 to 70%, with some being unable to basically cover their costs because of the reduction in shipments. So for certain places that were serviced by multiple warehouses that are now burned down, they basically don't receive any new shipments, so they don't have the ability to earn revenue. So their commission is being lowered because they don't earn enough revenue. And they also have the problem that no one from Wildberries is coming to pick up the new goods they have to deliver to another place. So basically, for the pickup points, which Wildberries has 83,000, 14,000 of those are owned by the corporate head. So basically 14,000 are owned by the company, and the rest, the 69,000 remaining, are actually small companies that own 1 to maybe 5, 10 pickup points. Those companies are now struggling, and they cannot pay their employees, they cannot pay taxes, and they cannot pay rent for their pickup points. And basically, the entire business model in that case is collapsing once you lose the pickup points, because you can't support them with enough revenue from your operations. We also learned about the Tula facility that the conditions were compared to a prison. There were full body searches being conducted, people having to strip almost naked every day upon entering and leaving the premises, and leaving all their possessions in lockers that weren't guarded. So people have reported that some of their own personal objects were stolen. Toilets weren't made easily available. Bottles with piss were found often around the facility because people couldn't go to the toilet while they were working. Drinking water was reported as rusty and unsafe to drink. Safety equipment such as fire extinguishers were missing. Also, first aid kits were non-existent in the facility, and they were placing arbitrary fines on people for anything that was broken was found in the facility. So basically, if someone delivered something broken and it was discovered upon entering the facility, people who were on that shift were going to get penalized with a fine from Wildberries. And if you know more about Wildberries, you know that one of the main ways that they're actually covering their profit is through fines to pickup points, fines to sellers, and fines to their workers. And also, if someone had a medical emergency, there was no one on site to actually attend to them, so they would have to call an emergency service from the nearby town, as was the case in Tula. Ozon also tried to limit the damage to its sellers. What it started doing was distributing their more expensive goods to pickup points, so they're not at warehouses. But that is going to raise the cost of such goods, and it's going to limit the operations of pickup points because they're basically having to work with less space for operations, because they're having to be used as secondary storage for the company to lower its costs in terms of damage to its sellers' goods in case. And I think this is now known for certain that after Wildberries, Ukraine will probably start targeting Ozon for similar reasons. Now, for other effects on the Russian economy when it comes to Ukrainian strikes, due to the strikes on the ships in the Black Sea, companies operating ships in the region, we're talking about companies that operate container ships, have added surcharges for the route from Novorossiysk to Turkey. This is from $500 to $1,000 per 20-foot containers, so a TEU unit, and $2,000 per a 40-foot container, so that's a double TEU unit. This is very high because the charges on that route for transportation of a 20-foot container were just $250 to $400 for one container, and for a 40-foot container, it was $900. And this is a problem for Russia because 1 million containers actually pass through Novorossiysk every year. For shipping to places like the Middle East or India, the port remains the only viable option. So this means that for those destinations, Russia doesn't have a cheap option to ship goods. And if what happened with Turkey this weekend, that it said it's limiting shipping going to the Black Sea, it means that they cannot ship to these locations almost at all. And in other news from the Black Sea, when it comes to the CPC, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, I forgot to mention that we don't have data this week on the tanker loading because of technical difficulties with the person who collects the data. So for the next few weeks, this data will be unavailable. As soon as it can be available again, we'll add it to the stream and I'll be posting it every week. But yeah, for now, that's going to be unavailable. But for Kazakhstan, it said that there are no alternatives for the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. It currently handles 80% of the country's oil exports. It's usually between 65 and 80% Kazakh oil. The rest is Russian oil. But there's also the announcement that a deal had been reached to limit strikes on ships carrying Kazakh oil by Ukraine with US mediation. So we'll see if that continues. Then it would mean that only Russian tankers are targeted near Novorossiysk, near the anchorage and near the terminal there, which would mean that 1/3 of Ural oil that's being shipped is probably going to stop being shipped, along with a significant portion of Russian oil products. Next, when it comes to Russian revenue for July, we got the data on the oil and gas revenue, which came in at 935 billion rubles. This is 37% higher than in June 2026, but then only 684 billion rubles were collected. This is because July is the first month of the quarter, which means that Russian oil companies pay an extra tax to the budget for every first month of the quarter, and that for July was 396 billion rubles. So if we remove that from July, you would see that the remaining sum is just 539 billion rubles, which is 21% smaller than what we got for June 2026. So despite the high oil prices, Russia is still not getting a lot of money from its oil and gas revenue in terms of getting money to the budget from what it can tax its oil and gas companies. It still hasn't managed to convert the closure of the Strait of Hormuz to actual big windfalls for its oil and gas revenues. When it comes to commodities and steel, we have data that prices for steel billets from Russia on the Turkish market actually increased in the last week of July by $10 to $20. They're now trading at $500 to $510 per ton. However, before accounting for the freight prices, prices actually moved just a little bit from $470 per ton to $465 to $475 per ton. And this is due to a drop in supply, but basically the price is almost unchanged. The main reason for the drop in supply is that Russian steel producers for the last week of July and in August are going to reroute most of their steel shipments to the domestic market. And the increase in price is actually more to do with the increase in the price of freight, which in the last week of July rose from $40 to $45 per ton to $40 to $45 per ton when it comes to freight from the Black Sea with a bulk carrier that's carrying steel to Turkey. And given what we mentioned earlier about the problems with the Black Sea, I expect those prices to increase further without actually there being any change in the Russian steel price. Actually, I expect there to be a decrease to accommodate the higher transportation costs because they have to compete with Chinese steel on the Turkish market. When it comes to grain, the price of Russian third-class wheat, due to the inability of exports through the Azov Sea and the Black Sea, has decreased by 11.3% since July 10th. That's when navigation through the Sea of Azov was impaired. And it has decreased by 17.8% year over year. For fourth-class wheat, we saw a drop of 14.5% since July 10th and 20.1% since the start of the year. However, the real situation might be much worse when it comes to actual prices at which Russian farmers are trading. We've seen that they started selling wheat at 8,000 to 9,000 rubles per ton versus the 14 to 15,000 rubles per ton that they were selling at before July. And I have to point out that that's a big problem for them because the profitability threshold for Russian wheat farmers is around 10,000 rubles per ton. So currently they have no place to store it. It's more expensive to ship it to other places through which they can export it because right now the free terminals on the Black Sea are closed, as well as the Sea of Azov and the shallow ports on the Rostov River and on the Volga River. And so they're selling it very cheap just to get it off their hands, and they're basically not making any profit. And this will be a bad year for them if this continues to be closed. That is the closure of the Black Sea and Azov Sea basin. They also tried to export it through the Caspian route, but there we've seen attacks also by Ukraine on ships there. And shipping it to the north, to the Baltic Sea, has a very high freight cost. And this basically prevents a lot of farmers from actually exporting through that route. So as a whole, Russian wheat producers and Russian grain producers are in a very difficult situation. Out of the 50 million tons that they exported in 2025-26 for that season, I think 30 million or more tons were exported through the Black Sea, either through the shallow ports of the Rostov, of the shallow ports on the Don River, or through the ports in Tuapse, Novorossiysk, and Taman. So right now, it seems that Ukraine might have managed to prevent the bulk of Russian wheat and Russian grain from being exported at all. And prices, because of that, have been collapsing all over Russia. Now, when it comes to interesting data points, in terms of high-quality shopping centers in Moscow, we're seeing that tenants are closing their locations there because they cannot operate such expensive locations with enough profit. Over the last 12 months, 2,300 locations were closed down. Only 80% of those were reopened by a new tenant. And in terms of the area provided by those locations in square meters, only 75% of that was recovered by the new tenants who opened stores there. And this is a bad sign if Moscow is having problems actually finding tenants for their shopping centers, and especially in the high-quality shopping centers. It's going to be a bloodbath in the regions. Also, they had to ban 2 models of Dongfeng trucks and 4 models of Zoomline trucks for violation of technical requirements. This is basically to prevent cheap trucks from being sold on the cheap Chinese trucks from being sold on the Russian market, cannibalizing KAMAZ market share. They've done that in the past with some other companies and their trucks. Usually the Chinese scheme is this: because Russia is in the Eurasian economic zone, they would pass technical inspections in other countries, let's say in Kazakhstan or in Armenia, and then they would be allowed to sell those trucks over the Eurasian economic zone. So then they would move the trucks to be sold in Russia with the technical specification validated from another country. And from time to time, when KAMAZ sales are threatened, Russia then goes in and says, no, that other country actually failed to properly inspect the trucks. We're going to ban these trucks from sale. Usually it's the most sold trucks from Chinese companies that are banned. And we've seen this happen several times already. So this is nothing new, but it's also another way in which Russia has to basically protect its own companies from Chinese companies basically destroying them and eating their market share. And as we mentioned earlier, in central Russia, for the first half of 2026, only 30.5% of mobile internet sections were carried out without restrictions. In Russia's border regions, 90% of mobile internet traffic occurred via whitelists. Whitelists operate when there's a shutdown of mobile internet in almost all cases to prevent drone attacks. I don't think it's been effective in preventing drone attacks, but it's been very effective in preventing Russians from actually using mobile internet and getting information. And they're very used to using 4G communications in terms of mobile internet. And the final interesting data point from this week, as I mentioned earlier, is that passenger traffic when it comes to flights between St. Petersburg and Moscow in the first half of 2026 decreased by 18%. For the period of January to July 2026, the decrease was a bit smaller, just 16%. And again, the main reason for this is because people are choosing other forms of travel because flights are being blocked by Ukrainian drone attacks on either of the two cities, which causes the grounding of all planes or the redirection of planes to other airstrips. And the final part is when it comes to inflation, we don't have debt because Russia stopped issuing debt auctions. But from the period of the 28th of July to the 3rd of August, there was actually a deflation reported by Eurostat. Again, this is the official figures, and you should take them with a huge grain of salt. For August, inflation so far is just 0%. For 2026 so far, inflation is 4.84%. That is official inflation. And what is interesting this week was that actually the Russian central bank raised its inflation target for this year. It was initially 4.5 to 5.5%, and now we're back to 6 to 7% for 2026, which means that they might miss even that target, and we might be back to 7 or 8% for 2026. And that's it for me for this week.
Thank you, Stanimir, as always, for your report on the Russian economy for the week. Okay, so I just had maybe one more topic for discussion for panel news, which is something I covered in my news report briefly, but I think it's like a little bit of a bigger topic, so I wanted to open it up to the panel a little bit, which is the recent Russian military leadership shuffle. There's like a few kind of significant things that happened. Probably the most significant was the they finally managed to organize and create a formal unmanned systems forces branch of their military, and they appointed a commander for it. This is something they've been discussing for over 2 years now, so that's a pretty significant development. And then several generals were kind of shuffled around, and this all appears to be kind of part of a broader effort to reorganize some structures within the Russian military. I don't know. Erlend, is there anything you wanted to say about this recent, changes in the Russian army structure?
Well, it's been, I think, more than 2.5 years that Russia announced that they will have their own unmanned systems forces, and it took quite some time before they actually managed to institutionalize it. I think last month it was mentioned by the MOD of Russia that they had trained more than 8,000 specialists for these unmanned systems forces, and then also that then subsequently Medvedev. I'm not sure if he tweeted it or if he said it in some interview. It was then referred to by TASS that the unmanned systems forces had taken in about 40,000 troops in 2026. The thing is that the numbers seems to be not adding up in the recruitment numbers that are public. So possibly a lot of these forces have been transferred from other units to the unmanned systems forces, which is natural. But obviously, the Russians are not very transparent about how they do things, so it's a bit of speculation. But yeah, it seems like the actual unmanned system forces that they announced a while ago is happening right now, but it's still far behind the organizational level that the Ukrainians managed to implement pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think it definitely took them a long time, and we'll probably see some of these more like informal units. I guess you were kind of talking about Rubicon when we were discussing this earlier. Like those informal units will probably be folded into this new structure, or what do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm not certain if it will be operationally folded in, because obviously the Rubicon Center of Excellence have, as they are called, have had the most success on the Russian side when it comes to UAVs, and also in general adaptation to modern warfare. And I would be surprised if the Russians will change up that much, because obviously there's a risk that the efficiency of the unit will lower if they get under or if they change the operational command of how that is working. And since it's been working pretty well for the Russians, I think we will see them operating more or less independently for the time being. Obviously, Ukraine has been trying to dismantle as much as possible of the Rubicon forces with, I would say, limited success, but it seems like it's actually hurting the Rubicon a little bit.
And then I think the only other significant change in terms of like personnel and structure was Colonel General Valery Solodchuk was removed from command of the center group and made a deputy defense minister responsible for consolidated rear and logistics services. So I don't know. I think that says something that the Russians are focused right now on logistics and drones, right?
Yeah. And the thing is that the Russians are not very prone to implement changes very quickly, and that's obviously positive for Ukraine. At the same time, them trying to do reforms right now is, I wouldn't say I would say it's questionable, because when you do large reforms in the military and you're in such a big of an attritional warfare, and you've lost so many commanders, generals, etc., building up new complete new command structures is going to be pretty difficult, and it's going to strain the other the sources of where you get that personnel from. So I wouldn't expect to see like big changes happening very fast, to be honest.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. I think that, as you said, in practice, it's going to be really complicated to actually achieve meaningful change through these like reshuffles that they've done. But on paper, I think it does signal that the Russian state and the Russian military is preparing themselves to continue the war for the foreseeable future. Would you agree?
Yeah, and also another thing that is important to remember is that all of what has been happening during the last 4.5 years have obviously changed not just the perception of warfare for the Russian institutions, but also there is institutional knowledge about what is effective, what is not effective, how to organize not just training, but also operationally unmanned systems forces and implementation of new tactics like the infiltration tactics. And making these reorganizations right now is probably also a way to preserve that institutional knowledge for the future. The Russians are trying to look long term as well. They have strategic goals that goes way beyond just Ukraine. And for the West, we should be aware that they are trying to preserve that institutional knowledge that has been built up during the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And that's worrying, because when you when the Russian military is organizing so that these kind of this specific type of warfare is institutionalized, that's not a good sign for us, because it kind of paves the ground for a modernization that can take place whenever there is some breathing room for the Russian armed forces, which might happen at some point during the next few years. And yeah, the danger for Europe is considerable, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a very good analysis. Okay, guys, so I think that was all the news stuff we wanted to cover this week. So now we'll get to some questions from chat. Oh, go ahead, Erlend.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something that happened during this week. So Militarny has a nice small short article about this incident. The Russians have been obviously bragging a lot about different new kinds of developments of weapons during the last 10-15 years that never really got fielded. The T-14 Armata is obviously one of those, but one of the systems that they've been advertising a lot and has been this active protection system called Arena M. And this week was the first time we've seen it in combat, and it was spotted on several tanks that were part of a larger scale armored attack that took place this week. Obviously, that's interesting from an analysis perspective, because protecting against FPV drones has been one of the main kind of head twisters for both the Russians, the Ukrainians, but also for us here in the West when analyzing the war. And APS systems have been brought up many times. They were deployed by the Israelis first, and it seems like they don't necessarily work very, very well against FPV drones. And the Russians experienced this firsthand. The fear for those that want to implement APS systems against drone has always been the saturation, and it was quite evident during this attack. And the report, at least from the attack, is that these systems managed to intercept some drones, but the problem is that when the enemy in this attack, or the Ukrainians were the enemy of the Russian attack, they can deploy enough drones to saturate these systems quite easily. So they, according to the article, they expended around 15 to 20 FPV drones per vehicle, which is still quite cheap to take out a tank, and that was enough to deplete the active protection system of ammunition. So yeah, you can see a report from SBU Alpha on this, and you will see that they managed to get in the hits anyways. So obviously it can be debatable if this specific Russian APS system is good enough, but in my opinion, it just shows further that any sort of protection against FPV drones will be incredibly difficult. I know the Ukrainians are working incredibly hard on finding usable solutions to not necessarily 100% protect against FPV drones, but to limit their efficiency to the degree that where you can actually do some maneuver warfare. That's a high prioritization by the Ukrainian military, and it's quite public. But I would say this is going to be very difficult, but not necessarily 100% impossible. But one system is not enough. You will need a layered system where you have turrets shooting down the FPV drones before they get in range, and active protector APS systems like the Trophy or other systems that will be some sort of the last resort. And even then, you're never going to be 100% certain that you can survive a mass attack of FPV drones. So we will see. But yeah, it was interesting anyways.
Yeah, it's definitely a really difficult problem. I think you explained this, but like active protection, right? I guess electronic warfare would also follow active protection, but that's that's easily, or I should say easily, but there are ways to mitigate that, fiber optics and hardening and things like that. So usually when we're talking active protection, we're talking about shooting it out of the sky. And then of course there's more passive measures like nets and cages and things like that. Those are passive protection systems.
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
yes. So, but in this sense, the APS or active protection systems are basically small. You can actually see it in this small clip here. There is a radar, and then there is something that shoots out a either basically a blast that shields and destroys the incoming projectile, or basically pellets to destroy the drone. I'm not sure exactly how the Arena one works with the effector, but these systems are basically last resort, and they were developed initially to counter against incoming RPGs, anti-tank missiles, to basically detonate the missile and create a shield with relatively short distance to the tank or to the armored vehicle. These systems have a lot of weaknesses as well, because obviously when you're doing an armored assault, most of the time you're doing that in combination with the infantry. So if you have incoming FPV drones and you have a bunch of infantry surrounding your armored vehicle, and this system activates, then you have a big problem, because it shoots out either an explosive shield or a bunch of pellets. You don't want to have infantry next to that. So that's kind of how an APS system works. And but yeah, it's an active measure. There are other active measures as well, like net guns. You have turrets that shoot and track incoming drones. None have been successfully implemented by either side. And then you also have electronic warfare, etc. On the other hand, you have passive protection systems, and we've grown kind of used to seeing them. And they also have one in the video. Passive protection systems are basically cages or some sort of physical obstruction that puts a distance between the vehicle and the incoming ammunition to attempt to limit the damage that the incoming projectile has. And for the time being, these are more successful than active protection systems, which is obviously a head twister for anyone that wants to develop a system or a platform that will be resistant to FPV drones, because these are very rudimentary, and in the long run, also they don't work. You just throw enough drones at them, and the tank is toast.
Yeah, I think it's a good summary of the developments in that category of defense measure. And I think, as you said, we're probably not going to see anything very soon in that area, but ultimately it'll probably be a combination of things, including these active protection measures that will be deployed on every expensive vehicle, like a big tank or something like that. But it's going to have to be a kind of a mix of things. It's not going to be like one solution to this problem. It's a big problem throwing 20 drones at you.
Yeah, and the reason for why the Russians are doing this is the exact same reason for why the Ukrainians want to find a solution to protect their vehicles against drones. Mobility on the battlefield is obviously a big problem. Both sides would like to have the ability to project mobility and mobile, let's call it maneuver warfare, back into the picture, because the front lines are, as we know, almost stuck or slowly moving in some parts. And every time each of the sides try to recapture, or when it comes to the Russians, they call it liberate, which means basically destroying everything that is on the soil. It takes enormous amount of personal resources to capture terrain, and it goes incredibly slow. And the slower it goes, the more people you lose. So the only solution to that is to somehow reintroduce mobility into the war, and you just can't do that unless you manage to somehow either cancel out or limit the damage that FPV drones does to your vehicles. I don't think that there is one solution to this. I think there needs to be a layered solution, and hopefully drones might be a solution to that. Drones countering drones is something that we've been talking about here before. Obviously, Ukraine is doing it in a large scale against ISR drones and Shaheds, but against FPV drones and smaller drones, it does work. Ukraine has been flying small drone FPV drones just to counter other FPV drones, or these kind of recoilless rifle variants that shoot down drones in the air. But we don't really have a reliable system to implement this on a large scale to protect a column reliably yet. And I hope that will change, but for now, either side is far away from it.
And I think, the same problem remains. Like, sure, your tank can launch a couple drones to stop other drones, but can it launch 20, and get them all?
Yeah, and you basically would need like a revolving system of drones being, launched and protecting your column, and then somehow being sent back to the operator and rearmed, changed out the battery. I guess for each vehicle you would probably need like something like 15 drones working continuously. That's obviously also a problem when it comes to manpower, because for now there is no automation in these kind of things. You need operators, you need people to rearm it, and yeah, we'll see. But I think within a year we will see something that is maybe revolutionary. I'm not sure, but we will see something happen to this regard, because it's been 2.5 years, 3, that FPV drones have been such a big threat, and I'm just expecting that something will come. But I also don't expect it to be as efficient as people would hope. I think it will be still almost impossible to protect an armored column to the extent that you would want to.
Yeah, and obviously I'm just speculating, but it seems like maybe a specialized vehicle would be, like, I don't know, more better suited to this than trying to have every tank be its own counter drone system. But I guess like you said, I think this is the way forward. It's just that right now we're in very early days. It's very primitive technology, and the technology isn't quite well integrated yet. So I think we'll see some real developments probably in the near future. But yeah, I think that's anything else, Erlend, or is that the topic?
No, I don't have much more. But the funny thing is the difference between how Ukraine would test something and how the Russians test something. The Russians, the first time we see this system in the field, it's not on 1 or 2 vehicles that they carefully try to work with on the front lines. No, they send a column of them, and they all get destroyed.
Yeah, it is strange that they would go all in on it before they tested it meaningfully.
I guess it's just Russian.
I don't know. Someone got a good contract and went with it. Okay, so there's a couple of questions here. Someone asked, I think we pretty much covered this, but using drones to detect other drones when it comes to like anti-vehicle stuff. Have we seen I've seen guys on BMPs using FPV drones with the goggles on, kind of hanging out, and I assume they're doing reconnaissance and looking ahead for the vehicle column, but I haven't seen a tank use drones in that way. Does that happen, Erlend, or no?
I assume that both sides are flying drones that have SIGINT capabilities on them. But obviously, I don't think it has been a priority from either side to develop. Okay, so let's track back a little bit. In order to make this actually viable, you have to have some sort of automation in the system, and I don't think there is a one single reliable way to detect drones. You would need a layered system, both using signal intelligence and probably either thermal cameras or combination of thermal cameras and day cameras with some sort of computer vision that can detect incoming drones. I don't think flying a small radar system is going to be viable. So this is a major development that will take quite highly sophisticated technology in use. But I'm sure there's been tinkering with this. But there's nothing that I've seen to scale that shows that this is being used widely.
Yeah, like most of this technology in the past has been designed to track missiles, right? And missiles are pretty identifiable on a system like radar. It moves real fast. It's real big. They do still get false positives. Like even then, when the problem is much easier to solve, a bird can pick up on a radar. But yeah, as you said, this would take an integration of like visual data, maybe acoustic data, even electronics signals being shot out by the drone. And you have to like triangulate all that. It's probably too much for a human. You would need an automated system that could take all that data, put it together, and put it in front of a human to make a call, maybe. But yeah, that's the real technical challenge right now, is like integrating all that technology into something that's like workable in a split of the moment, or right within a second, just to make that decision and hit the drone that's coming.
Yeah, I think you made a good point there. You need fusion of sensors, and I don't think one drone is going to be enough. I think that a drone can be a part of that system. You would want radars, you want computer vision cameras that are able to track your surroundings, maybe audible, I'm not sure, is something that could be used as well. But fusing all that together and then having a countermeasure for it is also needed, right? So yeah, I just don't think one single drone is going to be enough, but I think drones can play a part in the countermeasure plus detection, but it would need a massive ecosystem to actually be really effective.
And I can only hope that Western militaries are like scrambling to solve this problem as fast as they can, because yeah, it's here to stay. I don't see any of this changing anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, if there is one thing that Western military companies should invest in, it is this, and they should be lowering the bar on when they want to try and deploy stuff in Ukraine and test it. This has been a major problem from Western companies in general since 2022, that they just try to deliver whatever system that they've been developing in their own country. Some taking in some lessons learned from Ukraine, but they don't necessarily understand that the development is going so fast when it comes to both the electronic warfare spectrum and the tactics implemented. And when the systems are eventually deployed, they are deployed with basically like a year delay in how the battle is being fought, and the systems prove to mostly be inefficient and not work at all sometimes. And the only way to solve these issues and to find a viable system that can work in these conditions is to actively test them with Ukrainians and co-develop them. And I'm actually writing an essay on this that I will publish on the website soon. So yeah, hopefully I'll catch some eyes with that.
Website Tochnyi.info, where anyone can go right now and read other articles. Interesting. Thanks, Erlend, for that. I'm looking forward to your article. Okay, so we got a couple more questions. I guess I'm going backwards, which isn't quite fair to the audience, but I don't know. It feels like the best way thematically to move forward. Whoops. this one here. We got any numbers on percentage of wild berry shipping no longer flowing. If I understood Stanimir's presentation correctly, that was in the turnover figure, right? So it's probably between 50 and 70%.
I would
Is that
say
accurate, Stanimir? Or sorry, 30 and
that's
50%. Go ahead.
yeah. 50 to 70% is a decrease in terms of the level of turnover that pickup points have, and we're talking about pickup points that are not part of wild berries because it has a portion of its pickup points are corporate owned. So no, we don't have any information on that. We are working with scraps from the outside, and we don't have concrete figures from wild berries themselves because they're not a public company. They're not releasing that data, and they're also secretive in terms of how things are going at the company. So yeah, we don't have, but I think in terms of their warehouse space for their biggest warehouses, I think they've lost more than half of it. But again, that doesn't mean the sorting capacity or that all of their shipments were FBO, that is fulfillment by organization versus fulfillment by seller, and they're focused on the FBO. But they still had FBC customers. So we don't have concrete figures, but it's over 30% for certain.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So the turnover doesn't indicate exactly the whole company, but yeah, we can like estimate from all the data points surrounding the data we don't have that it's not good at all for wild berries. Okay.
No, it's very bad. Yeah, the company in terms of the way it's doing business is that, and this is something I should have probably brought up, and is that if you see someone comparing wild berries to Nova Pochta, tell them that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Because the thing that Ukraine is also destroying here is not just sorting centers. Wild berries warehouses are warehouses first for fulfillment by organization, and they are sorting centers second. The entire sorting center infrastructure of Nova Pochta is smaller than the first major wild berries warehouse that was taken out in Elektrostal, I think, in Moscow region. And I have to point out that what wild berries did and what Ozone did was they became sort of the main vehicle for Russian retail, non-groceries retail. For groceries retail, you still have supermarkets, you have ghost supermarkets where they're just a warehouse that delivers goods via delivery. Samokat is an example of that. You have regular supermarkets like Magnit, Lenta, Petyorochka. You have small discount stores operated by this. For example, Petyorochka, which is owned by X5, operates Chizik. That's the most famous one. But what Wild Berries is the place where every Russian retailer is represented. And what they do is they store the goods for that retailer for sales for 6 months in advance. It could be as low as 2 weeks. It could be as high as 6-7 months. And what is happening is Ukraine is basically destroying trillions of value in terms of warehouse goods that are the entire inventory of some companies. That's why sellers are crying. That's why they're being devastated. That's their entire inventory that because of the e-commerce market and the model they do business in, they probably loaned, that is, took out loans or used their entire cash supply to build up that inventory, store it in Wild Berries. They didn't have to operate their own warehouses. They cut costs like that, and everything they had was in that warehouse. That's what's being destroyed by the Ukrainian armed forces, that value. And like I said, Wild Berries is maybe 5% of Russian GDP for this year. Was less last year. Wild Berries and Ozone combined were 7-8% last year, maybe up to 10% this year. But what they represent was 20-30% of Russian retail. And everyone that wants to do anything in Russian retail, they have to be in Wild Berries. They have to have supplies in their warehouses, and they have to have part of that ecosystem, because everyone is looking at Wild Berries first and your store second. You'd at least have to have a place there to showcase your goods in terms of commercials, in terms of advertising, to be seen, to be visual. That's part of why you used to have big stores in malls, because you wanted to have that visual commercial because you're there and people are seeing you when they go through the mall. Now that's something that you have to do on Wildberries. And basically, Ukraine has managed to destroy brands in a single strike sometimes, because 6 months of that brand supply was in that warehouse and it's now gone, and they can't rebuild. And from here on out, that model that was everywhere in Russia, where every Russian was used to delivering and getting something from Wildberries, that was the cheap option for getting goods. That's gone. No one can provide safety for these sellers except for the government to assume ownership of all their losses, which would be financial suicide, because trillions could be destroyed every week. And we are looking at those kind of numbers now, with so much inventory being destroyed. We're looking at trillions of rubles. We're not looking at billions. And this was the strength of Wildberries. It had roped in everyone. I called it, I think I called it a metastasized organization on top of Russian retail. And the other way I described it is that in this war, this was basically a ticking time bomb. It wasn't a question of what happens when they get hit. It was a question what happens, not a question if they get hit. It was a question what happens when they get hit. Because they created such a cancer on top of the retail market with their high commissions that wiped out the savings of sellers, with their desire to have all of these huge warehouses, which are bigger than what we expect to see in other countries, and with their desire to keep this large inventory. And that's why they became a bomb on top of the retail market. And it's not just Wildberries. For Ozone, it's the same. Yandex Market to a lesser degree because they're smaller now. Sberbank has its own online marketplaces. A lot of companies started to try to make online marketplaces, and I think we mentioned last week that they're now switching to another model because big warehouses now become a target. And this will continue until the war ends. And they will continue to sell dual-purpose goods and military goods because this is the place where everyone goes. So that's where the military sellers have to go. They have no choice. They've monopolized at least the advertisement, and the easy way to find goods is monopolized by Ozone and Wildberries. If you want to see how much something costs and how it looks, you go there. You might buy it from a store, but first you check there. So that's where the military goods will be.
I'm trying to come up with an analogy. I think Nova Pochta is more like UPS or FedEx. Is there a European equivalent to that?
DHL,
Yeah.
I think. But yes, it's like UPS, and Wildberries is Amazon on steroids.
It's the difference between having a big you order a toothbrush on Amazon, it's sitting in a big warehouse somewhere, they just go grab it and they get it to you real quick, versus having something like eBay, right? Or, something else where you have the seller take it from their house to a distribution center and then, put it into the chain and it goes down and, it takes maybe a week or something.
Yes, and for example, Nova Pochta is facilitating deliveries from other places, but it's facilitating the delivery. It's not keeping storage. If you hit a Nova Pochta facility, you're taking out all the goods that would have been in circulation for the last 2 hours that weren't loaded on a truck and transported somewhere. That's it. That's all you're taking out. You're not taking out 6 months of inventory. You're just taking out what's in the sorting center right now. And what is in the sorting center has already been paid to the seller.
Right. So yeah, it's a totally different economic model that we're talking about.
I think I described it on Twitter like saying that fire to a car wash, and another thing is setting fire to a car dealership's warehouse. Both have cars, but they're completely different things.
Okay, so the next question goes down a rabbit hole that I'm always interested to talk about. So I think for brevity's sake, I'll do my best to summarize the story, and then we'll let Stanimir correct anything I get wrong. So the story of Wildberries, very briefly. A husband and wife, I think they're from Dagestan, started it.
Chechnya. She's from Chechnya. He was in Moscow.
Gotcha. Okay. So they started a website, and it was mainly the same way Amazon kind of started with books. They kind of started with clothes, and similar to Amazon, it just kind of grew and grew until it was this big thing. At some point in their marriage, they decided to divide the business, presumably for tax reasons, pretty common. The wife was like, "I'll take care of this little, dress website thing. you get the big manly thing where you handle all the construction of the warehouses. And he said, sure, that sounds great. So he started building all the warehouses. She started, doing the little dress thing, and it grew and grew. And eventually, this is a massive company, and they get divorced. So now the husband has a construction business, but the wife has Russian Amazon, right? Which one would you rather have? And now, of course, the construction business is kind of useless without the company, right? The whole point of the construction business was to build warehouses for this company. So the husband feels like he got screwed over, basically, in this agreement that he made. And so he hired Kadyrov, or he had a meeting with Kadyrov where he presumably offered him a cut of wild berries if he could kind of, forcibly remove it from the possession of this woman in Russia. And so Kadyrov agreed, and he sent the Chechen mafia or some of his goons down, and the female owner of wild berries caught wind of this, and she went to a Dagestani leader who's a senator down in Dagestan, and
I have to explain. No,
yeah,
it's better if I explain it, because you're making a few more mistakes than you should be. So basically, initially, the husband had sort of an ISP, internet service provider service, and they had that website for selling dresses on the side, and they had only one location. Later, they split the company. Yes, like you said, they split the company with him being in charge, getting 1% of Wildberries itself, and being in charge of 100% of that big company that builds all the warehouses. What happened was that there was a merger between Wildberries and Rus. Rus is controlled by the Dagestani oligarch, Süleyman Kerimov. It's controlled through two ethnic Armenian Russian brothers. The rumor is that she fell in love with one of the two brothers and left her husband. They have kids. They've been married for 20 years, but she still left him. And then he went, then she told him that Rus, which is an outdoor advertising company, which is much smaller than Wildberries, tiny even though it owns most billboards in central Russia, that they're going to combine the two companies into a new company, Wildberries and Rus, and that Rus will get 30% of Wildberries, which is strange. He thought he was getting screwed over. He thought his wife was being taken advantage of, and that's when he went to Kadyrov. And what happened was that Kadyrov sent, basically the Chechen mafia. These are people who practice sports in Moscow from Chechen origin, but they're basically the Chechen mafia. And they had a standoff in the central office of Wildberries, which is 500 meters away from the Red Square. And it ended up with a shooting between the guards at the front of Wildberries headquarters and the Chechens. And there was also police there. I think two people got killed. Incredibly, they were from the nearby region to Chechnya, with whom they have issues from Ingushetia. The two guards who were guarding the facility. And after that, because of this, Kadyrov decided to declare a blood feud with Süleyman Kerimov, who on top of being an oligarch is, as you said, the Russian senator from Dagestan. That's the upper house of the Duma. That senator from Dagestan also managed to use his connections in the Kremlin to introduce Tatiana Kim, who was going by her maiden name Kim, to the head of the Russian presidential administration, Vaino, and to the first deputy head of the presidential administration, who's in charge of propaganda, Gromov. And from then on, they managed to introduce her to Putin, and she said she's building a Russian project that will dwarf Amazon and Alibaba. And Putin loves such projects. Now, the reason why the blood feud didn't go anywhere between Kerimov and Kadyrov, the rumor is that Kadyrov still got paid, and he got paid $3 billion from Wildberries. That's why the Kadyrov clan is not keen on purchasing Wildberries, because they got paid a fraction of Wildberries stock. Well, not stock, but a fraction of the price of Wildberries stock at the height of its growth. And now they don't want anything probably to do with it. As for the husband, in the meantime, he had to close down, I think, the company that did the construction for Wildberries because there was no client. But he's doing fine. He's trying to turn M-Video, which is Russia's biggest electronics retailer, into an online marketplace of a similar form as Wildberries. He's currently the CEO of that organization. Did I miss anything in terms of the aspects of the story?
Yeah, I think that was a good summary. It's difficult to summarize. There's a lot of moving parts, but yeah, just you can't have Russian Amazon without some craziness like this going on.
Yeah, and people were saying that the 90s were bad because there was a shootout 500 meters from the Kremlin, and people got killed. And an organized mafia group went in and tried to raid business and shake it down for money, just like they did in the 90s. And it turns out that they were partially successful, like in the 90s. They got $3 billion.
Yeah, if you thought Jeff Bezos' divorce is crazy, that divorce is a crazy one. Okay, so next question is someone's answered the question. Will South Korea be more willing to support Ukraine if the news about North Korea supplying men, material, missiles, and launchers is true? First off, my understanding is it's pretty much confirmed to be true, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I'd have to double check. But as far as will South Korea do anything, that's more of a matter of opinion. My opinion is probably not. Like my general take on South Korea's view of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is that they view themselves as a small country and Russia as a big country, and they don't want to do anything to antagonize Russia because they're afraid that antagonizing Russia will result in Russia giving more assistance to North Korea. So they've done their best to stay out of it and try to not be a threat to Russia. Personally, I think that logic is backwards. I don't think that the Russians read the situation that way. I think they look at what South Korea is doing and see it as weakness, and they're going to just continue helping North Korea or having these beneficial trades with North Korea, however you want to look at it. And the only way to deter Russia from continuing to act this way and help their, the country threatening them with nuclear annihilation would be to deter Russia by basically saying, if you give North Korea military technology like drones, we're going to give Ukraine, military technology or, $2 billion in military aid or something like that. I think that the South Koreans need to show Russia that if you help North Korea, we'll help Ukraine, and that would deter Russia from helping North Korea as much. But again, I think the South Koreans see it differently. They see it kind of the other way I described, and that's just their view on it, and it's hard to convince them otherwise. I think they're going through their own kind of economic crises right now. There's a lot of boom and bust happening in the tech sector, and that's kind of freaking them out. So yeah, I think that's kind of my take on the situation. Does anyone else have any thoughts on it?
I would say don't expect from the South Korean government to focus more on things outside of the immediate range of the South Korean government. It's more self-absorbed and more focused on itself. And I had a friend who spent years there, and when people started to writing things about how now that North Korea is taking part, South Korea will do something, and he said, no, you don't get the South Koreans there, will do almost nothing. And that's because the focus is domestic and the focus is on their internal things. I don't expect South Korean policy to change in regards to supporting Ukraine or in regards to imports, for example, of coal from Russia. This is something that's outside their interests in terms of foreign policy, even though they're supposedly in confrontational. They're in an ongoing confrontation with North Korea, but I don't expect any significant move from South Korea to punish Russia beyond what's already been done.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think my personal opinion is that it's a mistake. You're seeing Russia and China and North Korea and Iran all learning pretty extensively from each other. They're, they're sort of covering it up, but not really. And the cooperation is pretty extensive. And I think that they're all going to be more potent adversaries as a result. And the fact that countries that are threatened by those countries aren't working together as much is going to become a serious issue in the future. So I don't know. Hopefully, South Korea changes course and starts viewing the situation that way. But I wouldn't hold my breath personally. Okay, so yeah, I think that's all the questions I saw. Erlend, did I miss any questions?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks, chat, for all your questions. It definitely helps us kind of understand what you guys want to know more about. And we'll try to, calibrate our content in the future towards that stuff. Yeah, I think that'll be it for us this week. Again, you can check us out on Twitter, BlueSky, and of course our website, Tochnyi.info. Thanks to the panel, thanks to Germany, to Ukraine, thanks to Stanimir, thanks to Erlend, myself, thanks to chat. You guys always help keep us on track. Thanks to everyone watching the videos after the fact. We know not everyone can make it to live, and we'll see everyone next week at the same time, 2100 Kyiv time. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava.
On behalf of the brave.